Alrighty, it's Friday, May the 1st, 3 days away from May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. Um, Second favorite day as a geek to Pi Day, which is March the 14th, the third month, 14, Pi 3.14. I know, it's goofy, geeky. But anyways, the Dunning Krugger effect has fascinated me for 3 or 4 years, I'd say. This basically is how people, it's a cognitive bias in that you think you know what you know, but you discover that you really don't know much of anything when you're starting a brand new activity. As a software developer, I've recognized this for years, but didn't have something like the Dunning Krugger effect, box to sort of put that into. And I see it a lot in, discussions, arguments, rants about climate change, and now with the coronavirus. It's, in a nutshell, basically the way it works is it's kind of a what I would call a performance curve, or confidence curve, and it has a very unique shape. It fundamentally, the way it boils down to is you have a level of confidence in something brand new, like you've become interested in learning how to knit. You've seen your sister do it, and she's just whipping away, and she's making scarves and face masks and coats for dogs and all this sort of stuff, and she does it really quickly. So the first thing you assume is, well, it must be a relatively simple activity. So that's the start of the Dunning Krugger confidence versus time curve. So you have a level of confidence that's really high, and then the other axis is time, as you kind of move through learning how to knit. So at the very beginning, since you don't know what you don't know, you have a very high confidence that within a couple of weeks you'll be making afghans and cool things, scarves and hats and all sorts of nifty stuff. So you go off and you buy the yarn, and you get what you think are kind of the needles that you need, having no clue, of course, what the whole difference between the size of needles, the types of yarn, the techniques, the stitch or the knots and all that sort of stuff. So you have a very high confidence, and then you start and you realize you have no clue whatsoever. So your confidence starts to decline, as basically you realize you don't even know what you don't know about it. So for me, as a software developer, because I don't knit, so I think knitting is a cool way to look at it, but for me, software development is more relevant. The very first thing you have to do is acknowledge the Dunning-Krugger effect and your cognitive biases, and realize anything new you're going to be an absolute moron doing during the initial phase. And the important thing you have to do, if you're really interested in making scarves and hats out of wool, is push yourself through all of these affronts to your intellect and realizations that you really don't know anything about how to do this, and get to the point where you produce a really crude scarf. So basically, at the very beginning, your level of confidence is really high, and then it crashes. And at this point, most people give up. They say, fuck it, I'll just go and buy a scarf. Why do I have to knit? And your earlier passion about, wow, wouldn't it be cool to be able to make scarves and coats for my dog and all that sort of stuff out of wool, evaporates, and you abandon it. But some people, me for example, I understand and recognize the fact that what I want to do is I want to get to the bottom of that curve. I want to learn what I don't know, as fast as possible. Because once you get down to the bottom, that's when the real learning starts. So the first part of the whole Dunning Krugger, confidence curve is you fighting with your cognitive biases. And basically answering all the big questions. What don't I know? In other words, what do I have to learn? So you basically, step one for me when it comes to software development of something new, and I've done this several times and very successfully in terms of mobile app development, is I got to pick apart all these pieces of, I have to find what I don't know. I have to recognize, I have to learn what in other words, I have to get to a point, that's the bottom of the curve, of this confidence curve, where I now know what I don't know. And that is when you can start to craft together a good plan to take each of those little things. And knitting, I don't know how to do it, so I'm assuming it's probably more complicated than writing an app for an iPhone. Who knows? I don't. I know how complicated writing an app for an iPhone is, but I have no idea how to knit. All I know is my sister is amazing at it. But anyway, I want to get down to the bottom, and I'm going to figure out all these unknowns. And then I will craft in a really what's called functional decomposition, where you break a function, you decompose it into small little bite-sized chunks. And you say, okay, what are needles all about? Why are there different sizes? There's yarn, there's a billion types of yarn. There's Angora, there's all sorts of different yarns. Why are they different? How do you twist this stuff together into knots? So you break all that down into these little pieces, and now you understand how, it sounds crude, but how stupid you are when it comes to doing something you have no clue how to do. And it's funny, there's that cognitive bias and that belief that being smart automatically translates to everything technical, when in fact, of course, it doesn't. So anyway, you can get to the bottom of this confidence curve where you're really discouraged, but since you knew at the beginning you were stupid, or it's a crude word, you lacked the technical understanding of how to do it, falling down that curve is actually a really enjoyable part of the process. You go, wow, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't even think about that. Oh yeah, why are needles different sizes? I mean, patterns. How do I do a scarf that is red and orange? How do I? Anyway, so you get to the bottom of this curve, but all those little discoveries can be real ego boosters, because now you're suddenly getting in charge of what you know is a very long process. Like my sister has been knitting for decades, and for me to assume that I'll be able to produce something as good as her in a couple of weeks is hubris. It's just assuming that my smarts in one thing automatically can translate over, and I'll magically, the knowledge fairy will come at night and fill me with all of this information about knitting, when of course that's total bullshit. So anyway, I get to the bottom of the curve, this confidence curve, and I start to learn all that stuff, and gradually I understand needles, I understand thread, I understand patterns, I understand you have to develop muscle memory and all sorts of stuff, and finally you make the fucking ugliest scarf ever seen by humanity, but you did it. And so now you're at kind of the base camp to Everest, with my sister being at the top waving at me, and me being at the base camp going, oh, I understand now. But I also understand that getting up to the top of that educational mountain is going to follow the same pattern. I'm going to stumble into things that I don't know as I uncover as I learn about other parts. So in software development, the big important thing to realize is this whole cognitive bias, encapsulated in what's called the Dunning Krugger effect, is one of your fundamental strengths if you give into it, if you understand it, if you admit to yourself that at the beginning of anything you're going to be stupid, and to put your ego aside and go, fuck, am I ever dumb? is one of your greatest strengths in terms of long-term development. Because once you've made that admission, you can say, well, knitting a scarf is cool. Writing an app and getting it published in the App Store is really cool. Making hundreds of thousands of dollars practicing and selling this skill is, well, not knitting, of course, because I have no idea how to knit, but software development, you can definitely do it. Six-figure salaries are even for somebody who's only been doing it for a couple of years, is not, too crazy. But once you learn that, you can start to say, well, what about other things that I'm interested in, like getting better at photography, understanding climate science, exercise, how to understand how the market swings, what are black holes, how does the earth work, what's this thing called the carbon cycle. It's really empowering because basically what happens is the entire process is really enjoyable as you go from a high level of confidence to, God, am I ever stupid, to, hey, that's starting to make sense, that's really cool. And so in other words, you got to motivate yourself all the way along the process, but you have to start that motivation right at the very beginning. You have to admit to yourself, I don't know everything, but subconsciously I think I do. So I have to kind of wrestle with that bias. I have to accept falling down the confidence curve to moron level, knowing that I'm well positioned to rise myself up and get to the top and realize I'm just at the base camp at Everest. And way at the top is my sister waving the Canadian flag that she knitted, saying, come on, Doug, if you really want to come up here, every journey starts with the first step. Anyways, it wasn't really a rant, it was more just a summary of how I run my life.